Welcome, everyone. My name is Chelsea, and I am the communications lead at Kids & Company. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Today, we will be welcoming Sunny Verma, president of Tutor Right, to share tips and strategies to help develop children's resilience. Sunny will give practical advice and tools that will lead to a more peace within a household, children who are not afraid to fail, and most importantly, happier children. We hope you leave feeling inspired and ready to help your children flourish. If you have any questions throughout the session, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will ensure they get addressed at the end of the session. Over to you, Sunny.
Thank you so much, Chelsea, for the warm introduction, and thank you to Kids & Company for having me back here. It's such an honor to be speaking about a topic that I'm deeply passionate about, and that is parenting. And that's because when we talk about leaving our mark, when we talk about leaving our legacy, there's absolutely no better way to do this than to be a parent. So I want to say thank you to all the attendees for allowing me to be part of your parenting journey. And I hope today to provide you with some insight, some ideas on how you could build resilience in your children. Now, just to go through the agenda before we get started, I'm just going to give you a question to contemplate throughout the presentation and a little bit afterwards as well. Then we're going to get into 3 ways of building resilience in your children. I'd like to conclude then on why this is really important, and then we'll make some time for some Q&A. It roughly takes me about, let's say, 30 minutes plus or minus a few minutes. So if I am going over, Chelsea, please feel free to interrupt me and let me know. But before we start today, I do want to start with just a little bit of a reflection. There is no job in this world that is more important than being a parent. There's no job that's going to give you more joy, more excitement, more happiness. And there's no job in this world that's probably going to cause you more agony, more stress, more worry. I'm sure every parent's nodding their heads right now. And that is really because it's an honor. It's such an honor to be a parent, because it's truly, we're our children's biggest role models. We're our children's biggest heroes. And that's something we have to really take into consideration. So because of that today, I really want to talk about this presentation is about you as much as it's about your children. This presentation isn't just about building resilience in your children. It's also about how do you become a better parent. That leads me to this quote, which is, let's not make this world better for our children, but instead make our children better for this world. The question is, how do we make our children better for this world? Well, here's 3 things. Help them develop compassion, help them develop self-love, and as importantly, help them develop resilience. So how do we develop resilience in our children? This is something I want you to ponder throughout this presentation. What are some of the best ways, or some of the best ways that you think about when you have to develop resilience in your children? And not just throughout the presentation. I also want to encourage it to do it after the presentation. Every time your child hits a struggle, hits an obstacle, every time there's a little bit of resistance in your life, this is a really important question to ponder, because it'll allow you to make the best decisions on how you can actually allow your child to overcome some of the adversities that they'll be facing in their life. Now, before we jump into the 3 ways to build resilience in your children, I do have 2 disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1, my points come from my studies, my points come from research, my points also come from my own experience. I want to respect that your family values and your personal values may not align. So please only take what makes sense for you and your family. And disclaimer number 2, what I highly recommend is do the inner work alongside with your child. Those who do the inner work alongside their children tend to see the greatest results. And here's why. Your children are watching you like they're wearing binoculars. What you do, they will do. What you say, they will say. How you react, they're going to react. It truly is monkey see, monkey do. I always laugh when I think about how much kids actually replicate their parents. But that's why it's important to think about when you're talking about transforming your child, it's also important to think about how you can transform yourself. So perhaps this presentation isn't just about building resilience in your children, but it could also be looked at building resilience in yourself. So let's get started. Point number 1. If you were in my presentation last year, you'd probably know this is a point that I love to hammer home, because I think it's one of the most important points for everybody, for our children and ourselves, and that is normalizing failure. Now, just to give you some context here, I've been in the space of education, I'm aging myself, but almost 20 years. And every time I come across a new student, a new child, I always do this icebreaker to get to know them a little bit. And in this icebreaker, I ask them 2 questions and only 2 questions. The first question I ask them is a question we've all been asked before. It's the question of, what do you want to be when you're older? And because it's such a basic question, I get basic answers. I want to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or nurse or cop, etc. It usually has quite an essence of lackluster, and it almost seems canned and rehearsed. And so when the kid's done with that question, I ask them question number 2. I say, in my hand's a magic pill. If you swallow this magic pill, you could become great at anything. What would you become great at? Now their eyes widen, they stand up a little straighter, there's excitement in their voice, and they say, well, I'd play in the NHL, or I'd be a famous YouTuber, or I would be a pediatrician, or I'd be an astronaut, I would change the world. I even heard kids saying, I'd cure cancer. It's amazing. It's amazing. I feel so honored that I get access to these kids' vast and wild ambitions. I love it. But irrespective of how amazing it is, there's a real sad underlying story here. I pretty much asked the exact same kid the exact same question. I said, what do you want to be when you're older? And if you could be great at anything, what would you be? And most of the times, these answers are distinctly different. Why? Why do we suppress our hopes, our dreams, and our ambitions at such a young age? Why do we push them down? Let me tell you why. You see, when I do this icebreaker on children, a very unique phenomenon happens. Typically, their parents or their guardians, maybe their older sibling or even their teacher. This doesn't happen all the time, but it happens more often than not. They'll come up to me and they'll say, thank you, Sonny. Thank you so much for getting my child excited about their future. Thank you so much for getting them enthused about all that they could be, but we just love it if you could simmer it down a little bit. We'd love it if you could tone it down. And I say, tone it down? Why do you want me to tone it down? I'm just kind of curious. Well, you know, we don't want to get their hopes up. You don't want to get their hopes up? Then what direction do you want their hopes to go? You see, in this world that I live in, that you live in, and all our children live in, there's only 2 directions our hopes can go, up or down. What direction are we pushing our hopes? And I know parents, we're not pushing our kids' hopes down, but this really begs the question, are we pushing their hopes up? Are we pushing their hopes up? Let me tell you why this is important. Let me tell you why this is so important. You see, when our kids go for their dreams, their ambitions, and I understand dreams and ambitions are going to change, especially as they're younger. But when they go for their dreams and ambitions, they could be something as small as getting a good grade to really wanting to change the world. They're going to be told that it's nearly impossible. They're going to be told by the outside world, by so many people that they come across, that it's nearly impossible. So parents, for my first point, what we have to do, we have to be the voice of reason in our children's mind, that when someone tells them that something is nearly impossible, that we are going to focus on the nearly and we're going to let everybody else focus on the impossible. I'm going to say that again. When someone tells their children something is nearly impossible, we have to be the voice of reason that tells our children that we are going to focus on the nearly and let everybody else focus on the impossible. Because here's why. In that little sliver of nearly is where the magic of life happens. In that little sliver of nearly is where resilience is born. It's where you try and you fail and you try and you fail and eventually you succeed. This is where it resides. This is why it's important. Now, to provide you with a little bit more context here, let me take you on a journey for when I first got an education, because it's a space I thought I would never be in if you asked me when I was a teenager. So several years ago, I got a call from my friend. And she called me because she was in a lot of distress. You see, her younger sister was failing grade 12 English. And because she wasn't doing well academically in grade 12 English, she had a bunch of tutors. They didn't work. My friend was telling me that it was becoming the black sheep of her family. Her parents started writing her off. They were worried about her friends and her peer influences. And they were really concerned that she was going to go nowhere in her life. And they said, listen, Sonny, you're really interested in personal development. It's kind of a last chance. We're hoping that you're willing to give her a pep talk and even, perhaps tutor her. I said, well, how can I say no to that pitch? So I accepted the offer. And let me take you to the first moment when I met this individual. So we decided to meet at a local library. And I remember as I'm about to enter into the library, my heart starts beating really fast. I'm like, whoa, I feel a little bit nervous because I never tutored before. And then I open the library doors and I see that individual. She was sitting in the distance. I walked over to her, pulled up the chair, sat down, and I said, hi, I'm Sonny. Nice to meet you. And I'll never forget how this conversation went. Let me tell you how this conversation went. She looked at me and she said, Sonny, it's nice to meet you, but I don't know what you're doing here. I said, well, I'm here to be your tutor. She looked at me, she said, you know, I've had several tutors in my past, and let me tell you, it doesn't work. We're kind of just wasting our time. I was like, oh, wow, I got a hard cookie here. I said, okay, listen, I remember being grade 12. I remember I had a lot of assignments to write, some essays to write. Perhaps you got something that, you know, that we can work on that you have to write. I'll never forget what she said to me. She looked down, then she looks back at me, and she said, Sonny, like I said, I don't know what you're doing here. I can't even write. I was like, oh my, this kid's in grade 12. They claim they can't even write. Now it's not just my heart beating in my chest. It felt like it was going to pop out of my chest. I started sweating from my armpits and my forehead. I'm like, should I just pack it up and leave? Because how am I going to help this individual? But then I looked down, I had a pen in my pocket. I picked it out and put it in front of her. I opened up my backpack, took out a notepad and put it in front of her as well. And I looked at her and I said, can you write? You can't write. She looked back a little confused, reluctantly picks up the pen and begins to write the statement out. As soon as she's done, I grab the pad of paper and hold it up. I say, ha, you obviously can write because you just wrote, I can't write. And she laughed. We both laughed. I said, listen, all jokes aside here, there's a sad underlying lesson that you have been taught. You've been taught it's better to never try than to try and fail. You've been taught that you are going to make mistakes, but let me tell you something, the biggest mistake you'll ever make is not trying. If you don't try, you fail by default. And anything that you've admired that another individual has accomplished, do you want to know what it started with? It started with the single act of trying. Where would your life be if you just tried? What would happen to you if you were just willing to take that step forward in your life? What would that look like? She paused for, several moments afterwards. I knew the message hit her hard. And she said, Sonny, you're right. But let me tell you, I feel like a failure. I feel like such a failure. I said, listen, you may have failed, but you are not a failure. You may have failed, you're not a failure. There's no such thing as a permanent failure. Failure is not permanent. And parents, this is a message that we have to give to our kids. We have to reduce the label of being a failure. It will encourage trying. So how do you do it? Brings me to my first takeaway of today. We do this through something called famous failures. So what is a famous failure? So parents, at least once a week, what I recommend is to sit down with your children and have a conversation with them about a famous failure. A famous failure is an individual who has accomplished great feats in their life, but had to do it by overcoming a lot of adversity, by overcoming a lot of failure. These are people like Michael Jordan, who famously got cut from his high school basketball team, or Oprah Winfrey, who was told that she was never going to be a media mogul. There's thousands of them out there. Now, here's the thing. I call it famous failures because I like the alliteration. It doesn't need to be called a famous failure. It can also be just somebody closer to home, perhaps the grandparents, perhaps yourself. You can give them the narrative of the adversity that you faced and the success that you were able to accomplish because of it. It can be you. And now here's the thing. If your children are a lot younger, what I highly recommend is using superheroes like Wonder Woman or Spider-Man, who is trying to save the world. And by doing so, they're overcoming a significant amount of external and internal failures and obstacles. It's amazing. Now, here's the thing I want to stress. If you're going to do this, don't make this a passive conversation. Make this one of the most intentional and meaningful conversations that you have with your children during the week, because it's going to redefine what failure means for your child. Failure is going to go from I need to quit to I need to persevere. Failure is going to go from the opposite of success to the number one contributor of success, right? This is going to redefine what failure means for children. This is why I recommend it. So to summarize, how to normalize failure in your child. Number one, remind them that they're capable of achieving a lot more than they give themselves credit for. Be the individual who believes in your child, even when it's hard to. Number two, create a very safe environment. I want to stress the word safe here, a very safe environment to try. Trying is a first step of success, and that needs to be the constant reminder for our children. And number three, every week, go through famous failures. And if you'd like resources and ideas of where you can obtain some of who these famous failures could be, I'm happy to provide that in the question and answers. Just please feel that, ask it then. So let's get into point number two. Point number two, one of my favorite points is called opt into optimism. I also like to consider it dwelling in the good. Now, this is one of my favorite points because it is so, so important for our children. So in our last point, I took you on a journey of when I got into education. Let me take you on a journey of one of the most magical moments of you being a parent. And that is when your child first started to learn how to walk. There's one day you might have just been sitting on the couch and your child's with their shaky legs holding onto something, and then they take a step forward. And then they take another shaky step forward, and then they fall down, and you stand up and you say, wow, get back up. You can do this. And you're clapping along the way. And they take another step and they fall back down. You call your spouse over, you pull out your phone, you start recording them. You both are giving them so much affirmation, so much love, so much excitement. And eventually your child reaches you. And you know what you do when they reach you? You pick them up, you go, mwah, you hold them up, you give them a big hug, you put them back on the ground. And you know what happens when you put them back on the ground? It is amazing. Irrespective of how many times they stumbled, irrespective of how many times they fell, all they want to do is to continue to learn how to walk. It is amazing. And that is because of the love you've given, because of the optimism that you poured into them during that time. That's a huge component to it. Now, this begs a question. What do we do, let's say, when our child first stumbles at school? Do we treat it the same way when our child first learns how to walk? Or the first time our child, let's say, falls an expectation that we were hoping for them? The answer is no. We typically don't do that. And there's good reason for it. So I don't want to say there isn't. There is good reason for it. But today I'd like to encourage a different kind of thinking, a different way to approach dwelling in the good, opting into optimism with our children. And that is through punishment and through reflection. So let's get into that. You see, the number one form of punishment in our country, it is called detention, right? I would know, I was a kid at detention. and if it's not detention at school, sometimes this could be very similar to grounding at home. So let's define what detention is. Detention is when you take a child who has done something wrong, something worth punishing, perhaps your own children even. And when you take them in detention, you put them into isolation and you want them to think about three things. You want them to think about what they did wrong, why they did it wrong, and how they will never, ever do this again. You want them to dwell on it. You want them to stew in it. Back in the day, we'd want you to write it out 100 times on the chalkboard on lined paper so it ingrains your subconscious. We really want to ensure you're not going to make this mistake again. And here's the thing. I think you can learn from your mistakes. I think that's great. It's one of the best ways of learning is a reflection of our mistakes and how we can improve. But this does beg the question, what do we do when our child does something right? Something worth rewarding? Do we ask them the same three questions? No, we typically say, hey, you could play with your video games a little bit longer. You could stay out a little bit later. Maybe you could watch your favorite TV show a little bit more, right? This is how we reward them typically. So what I want to encourage us to do is if we're going to ask for these three questions in punishment, let's ask for very similar questions when it comes to reward. So when our children does something right, let's have them reflect on what did you do right? Why did you do it right? And how can you replicate this in your future? Once again, it's not that I don't think you can learn from your mistakes. I absolutely do. But I absolutely certain that in the reflection of what you've done right is where resilience is born. When you can reflect on what you've done well is where you're going to start to stem a huge level of confidence. So parents, we need to create space and energy and time for this level of reflection. So how can you help support this at home? Well, one of the best ways of supporting this at home is through positive reinforcement. Now, this is a term you probably heard before. You probably know a lot about it as well. Most people do. I'd like to encourage and perhaps provide you with a different way of looking at positive reinforcement. So the best way, let's first start with defining what positive reinforcement is. And the best way I can do that is through giving you an example. So let's just say your child comes home with an A+. What do we typically say? We say, great job, or you're so smart, or you're a genius, or something along these lines, right? We comment on their accomplishment per se, which is great, which is fine. But there perhaps a better way of doing this. In the 1990s, there was a theory that came out that's called growth mindset. You may or may not be familiar with it. And it's gained a lot of became really popular, I'd say, in the last probably decade and heavily in the more recent times. And I'll explain why in just a second. But growth mindset essentially says, don't comment on a child's outcome or result, comment on their effort. So if your child brings home an A+, instead of saying great job, or you're so smart, or you're a genius, say something along the lines like this: great effort, or great job at asking for help, or great job in finishing your homework. Essentially comment on the effort. What you're really trying to do is comment on the actions, habits, and behaviors that are going to help your child lead to the results that we're all hoping for, right? The actions, the habits, and behaviors, because this allows your child to take ownership of their results in life. So to give you some rationale of why this is an important form of positive reinforcement, more recently, they've done studies on how to compliment kids and complementing the efforts. They took a group of 373 middle schoolers and subjected them to this kind of positive reinforcement. Over roughly a year and a half period, these kids saw a 10% increase in their marks and saw statistical significant improvements in their confidence and persistence. This is obviously things that we want for our children. This is why I highly recommend changing the way or modifying the way that we give positive reinforcement at home. So to summarize, opting into optimism, create time for reflection on when your child does something right, and comment on their effort, the actions, habits, and behaviors that are really going to help them lead to the results that we're hoping for. And in terms of reflection can just be conversation. It could be through meditation, it could be through journaling, it could be through any means of ways that you could help encourage that with your child. So let's go to point number 3. Positive affirmations and gratitude. Now, this one I hold very dear to my heart because it's something that I practice myself. It's something I've also institutionalized with the kids that I work with, and I've seen tremendous results, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment. But before we get into positive affirmations and gratitude, let's talk about why it's really important. In a study done in 2017, they said 73% of teachers claim that low self-esteem and anxiety is a pressing concern in their classroom. 33% of kids miss a day of school to deal with anxiety. 25% of parents take off their own day from work to help a child cope with anxiety and low self-esteem. These numbers are staggering. And this was in 2017. We are now in a post-COVID-ish era. And the conversation around mental health, especially in our youth, is without question more apparent. So I would think these numbers would be even more staggering today. So how do we counter this? Well, we do it through positive affirmations. And let me give you a little bit more context before we get into positive affirmations and how to do it. You see, I was part of a study called the Honest Experiment. And in the Honest Experiment, what we did, we brought groups of teenagers into a classroom. And when they sat down, they saw 2 sheets of paper in front of them. Then myself or my colleague would go to the front of the classroom and we would start to dictate what the Honest Experiment is. And we'd first say, thank you for opting into the Honest Experiment. As you notice, there's 2 sheets of paper in front of you. I'm going to ask you 1 question for each sheet of paper. That means you're going to have 2 questions altogether, and you're going to have 1 minute to answer each question. Does that make sense? They all nodded yes. And I said, well, listen, here's the catch. There's no right or wrong answer. We just want you to be honest, hence why we call it the Honest Experiment. Every student agreed. This is great. I said, okay, are you ready for question 1? I got the nod again. So I said, okay, question 1. I want you to write down everything you would change and everything you dislike about your life. It's a really tough question. The teens picked up their pen and began to write. By the end of the minute, we saw them massaging their hands because they wrote so much, tears dripping from their eyes. We gave them a 5-minute breather because we didn't anticipate that. We didn't expect it to be so emotionally charging. Then we brought the kids back into the room after the 5 minutes. I'd go to the front of the classroom and I say, thank you for answering question 1. Are you ready for question 2? They'd nod yes. I say, okay, question number 2. I want you to write down everything you love about yourself and everything you love about life. Here's the thing. The minute starts and the majority of kids never even start to write. And those who do finish within under half a minute. When we did this experiment several times, we even reversed the order of the questions and we got the exact same results. It tells us where our head's at. It tells us where our kids' heads are at, right? We're so good at self-critique and so bad at self-compliment. How do we build self-compliment in our kids? Because it can really help counter out the low self-esteem and the anxiety. It's been proven to. Well, the best way to do it that I know of, that's natural, is positive reinforcements, positive affirmations. What is a positive affirmation? It's a positive reflection of oneself. It's very simple. And it usually just starts with the words of I am, is I am grateful. I am worthy. I am strong. I am capable. I am wonderful. It's so easy to do. So parents, what I recommend once a day at least, and preferably twice a day, to go through 1 to 3 positive affirmations with your kids. Have them write it down or verbally say it, 1 to 3 of them per day, at hopefully twice a day. And the reason why I want it twice a day, a good friend of mine who's a pioneer in this field said, Sonny, it's like a toothbrush for the mind. It scrubs out the negativity and replenishes it with positivity, right? It's really easy to do. It could be awkward at first doing it with your kids if they're a little bit older. The younger they are, the easier it is to institutionalize, but it's 100% worth it. I've done it with the students that I work with, and I've seen their parents would say they're unrecognizable, like how much more love that they can exude within themselves and to others around them. So what's another way of helping with this? Gratitude. Now, as we talk about gratitude, let me give you some context of the importance of gratitude. Gratitude has a really modern term to it, because a lot of people are talking about gratitude journaling, but it really stemmed from the 1990s out of the University of Pennsylvania under Dr. Martin Seligman's lab. And what he was trying to do is get an understanding of, does gratitude impact people's day-to-day and how they live life? So they took 3 groups of people, and for each group over a 12-week period, they asked them to write about weekly events. Group number 1 was asked to write about things that they're grateful for. Group number 2 was asked to write about things that irritated them. And group number 3 were asked to write about events that actually had no emotional charge. Now, here's the thing. Group number 1, the ones that wrote about what they're grateful for, had higher levels of happiness, had more zeals for life, had higher levels of self-esteem. It was amazing, right? Group number 2, those who wrote about things that irritated them and that upset them, had more visits to the doctor's office, had higher levels of learned helplessness, which is a oh, woe is me syndrome. And they had more panic attacks and higher levels of anxiety. They got down the negative rabbit hole. So how do you counter it? Gratitude. Very similar to positive affirmations. Have your children write down or say 1 to 3 things that they're grateful for every day. And you can combine this in with the positive affirmations. You can create it as a daily routine or a nightly routine, however you see fit within your family. Now, it is so easy to do, right? You could say things, I'm grateful for my heart. I'm grateful for my mom, my dad. I'm grateful for the floor that I'm standing on. I'm grateful for the ceiling above me. I'm grateful for the sunlight. I'm grateful for the water. There's millions of things to be grateful for. And that's what we're trying to do, is show our kids, like, this is a pretty cool thing that we're all living here, right? It's amazing that we're all alive here. Let's exude some of that gratitude. Let's even go inwards and feel some of that gratitude, right? It's a really good feeling for our children. And the studies that have been done on this are phenomenal for youth. When we look at it, we have to understand that this does take time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not a one-off kind of thing. It's not that you do it once and it's done. It's something that you have to do on a regular occurring basis. You have to build it in as a habit. Now, I do have some resources I could suggest that's going to help with this, and I'm happy to answer that in the Q&A, but I do want to stress that the students that I have been able to do this with, it has been amazing. Usually after 6 months, like the amount of love that they even exude to mom and dad, I think mom and dad are really happy. Like, I didn't expect that from my child. It's quite amazing, because this is what we're trying to get them to anchor into, is to gratitude. So that brings me to the end of my 3 points. Now, I just want to quickly summarize. Why is this important? Why is it important to build resilience in our children, and how you can really look at it as a parent at home? You see, and I shared this story last year, so I want to share it again because it really touches my heart. I have a friend, and more recently, his son was learning how to crawl. And because he's learning how to crawl, he's starting to explore new nooks and crannies of the house. And every time he approaches a room that he's unfamiliar with, you know what he does? He looks back to ensure that dad is there. Dad is going to watch over him. Dad is going to protect him before he enters into the new room. And that's exactly what we want for our children, right? We want them to know that we're always going to be there when they look back for us in every moment of their life, not just when they're exploring rooms in their house, right? Like, for example, like when they enter into grade 1, or when they get their first bad report card or grade A+, or when they first fall in love or get their first heart broken, and everything in between. We want to be there for them for every single moment. We want to be there with them for all the richness that life has to offer, right? That's what it is. That's what it really means to be a parent. So parents, I want to stress, if you're going to take anything from today, your presence is going to build trust with your kids. And that trust leads to their resilience. Your presence is going to build trust with your kids, and that trust is going to lead to their resilience. I was part of a study where we took very successful people, and what I mean by success, high material wealth and also high levels of happiness. And we wanted to see the correlation to their parenting, the parenting pedagogical methodologies that their parents have had on them. And what we hypothesized is essentially that their parents probably did these grand over the top things for them, like paid for their university, bought them a car when they were 16, or took them to Disney World, or a bunch of family vacations, all these huge things. And you know what? We were completely wrong. After doing the surveys and the in-depth interviews with these individuals, we found the one commonality that their parents have had on them. You know what it was? Their parents created space and time for recurring events and activities. Recurring events and activities like going for evening walks with mom every summer night. It was like fly fishing with dad every single weekend. It was playing family board game night every Friday eve, because in these moments is where they built trust with their parents. In these moments, they showcased love. It was like the intentional, fun, loving time that they had with their family. And they said, you know what these moments led to? These moments led to me trusting my parents, that I trusted that they were going to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. They were going to make me feel like I fit in when I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And most importantly, through these moments, I knew my parents were always going to have my back, because we built such a beautiful bond together. So as we come to conclusion today, many of us think we have a lot of time to build this trust and bonds with their children. I want to provide you with a very gentle reminder, and I want to stress the word gentle here, that perhaps you don't. And here's why. A good friend of mine provided me with this reminder, and I'd like to provide it with you, especially as we come into the summer months. If you are lucky, you will have 18 full summers with your children. And if you're lucky, that means if your child is 2, you're going to have roughly 16 summers left with them. If your child's 10, you're probably going to have 8 summers left with them. If your child is 15, 16, you're probably lucky if you get 2-3 summers, full summers left with them. So parents, today, go home, hug your kids, give them a big kiss. Remember, your presence is going to lead to the resilience. Create space and time for failure, and just showcase how much you love them. And I promise you that will be reciprocated right back. Maybe not recently, but when they're a lot older, they'll look back and say, thank you, mom and dad, for always being there for me. So that concludes my presentation today, and I'd love to open up to some Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunny. That was really amazing. So inspiring. So I think we have a few questions here already, or maybe more so comments. I saw one, we had a question regarding the recording, and I can answer that one. So yes, we will be sharing a recording. Kids and Company will send a follow-up email after today's session that will include a full recording of the presentation. Great. And then another question here is from Randy. He says, thanks so much. Please provide resources for famous superheroes and gratitude/affirmations.
Sure. So there is
again, not so much fresh.
Yeah, so I can definitely quickly recommend 2 things that I think you could purchase on Amazon, and I'm not affiliated with them by any means. I just recommend and usually get them for the students that I work with. The first one with famous failures. There's this wonderful book that came out that's called Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. In this book, each page represents a story of perhaps somebody you heard of or somebody that you haven't heard of, a female who has done amazing things in their life. And it's just one page. So if your children are young, you could read it to them at bedtime, or if your children is, let's say, in their tween ages, they can read it themselves. But what it does, it reconfirms that, there's going to be a lot of obstacles that they can face, but persistence is going to be what gets them there. And that's why I highly recommend this book. There's several beautiful stories in there. And the second thing, for positive affirmations and gratitude, a journal that I default to myself, and they've recently launched one for kids, is called 5-Minute Journal. And now they have one called 5-Minute Journal for Kids. Through it, they go through daily affirmations, daily gratitude, and some nice self-reflection questions as well. And you can do that alongside with your children. You can make it as a family daily activity, or your children can do it in isolation on their own.
Amazing. Oh, there's maybe a little bit of a lag on my end. So I have someone else here. Pam says, could you please share a couple of examples of positive affirmations for a 3-year-old preschooler?
Oh, that's so great. That's such a good time to start positive affirmations. There's two positive affirmations that I recommend irrespective of age, and I think will serve them for a lifetime. And that is I can and I am capable. Many times when we're coming across obstacles in our life, we forget that we can and that we are capable. You can fill in the blanks to whatever you want whenever it's needed, but to every day remind yourself, whether when you're looking in the mirror, when you're journaling it out, is I can and I am capable. And it could be I am capable of beating this video game. It could be I'm capable of swinging on the monkey bars. I'm capable of, answering what this basic single digit question is. It doesn't matter, right? We want them to anchor into I can and I am capable.
Amazing. Okay, I have another question here. If your upbringing has led to you being a strict or rigid parent, is it ever too late to undo any unrealistic expectations or harshness and provide positive affirmations and positive reinforcement to kind of make up for any damage done to date?
Oh, what a heartfelt question. Whoever asked that, thank you. Because I know a lot of parents think that in my private one-to-one conversation with parents, I get that question all the time. So trust me, when I say this, you are not alone with that. Um, First and foremost, without question, can you remedy? Without question. I mean, one of the things that I always want to encourage parents and remind them of, your first child, the first day that they're born is the first day that you're born as a parent. That is a big undertaking for you as an individual. And our kids, don't necessarily recognize that until they get older. But if you start to transform yourself, and maybe some of the ways that your parents have maybe been a little bit more strict with you, but start to lean off and wean away from that, your kids might be a little, confused initially, and that's fine. Give space for that confusion. Be okay with it, but just keep persisting at it, because eventually your kids will adopt to who you've transitioned into as well. So if you're a person who starts pushing things like positive affirmations, pushing things like gratitude, pushing things like famous failures, your kids are going to see that. And one of the things that might catch them off guard, because I've seen this, like, they're nervous because they didn't do so well in something, whether that's like, say they were supposed to be a piano recital and they didn't kill it, and mom and dad were really hoping they killed it, or they, were supposed to ace a math test and they didn't do it, or they're supposed to score in hockey and they didn't score, or whatever it may be. That is your moment to say, that's okay. I'm happy you tried. Let's talk about what you did good today. And it takes kids like, whoa, hold on a second. There's going to be space for confusion here, but this is where I'd anchor into. Always when you're about to get a little irritated on what they didn't accomplish, I would give yourself a little bit of space and then enter in with congratulating them trying, and consistently get them to reflect on what they've done well. And not to say that you can't reflect on what they've done wrong. That can come in a little bit later as well. But without question, do you have time right now to remedy that? I've seen it being remedied when kids are in their 30s and their parents are in their 70s. So trust me, it can be remedied.
Amazing. Another question here. If your kids are worried about failing, what's your advice to help them overcome that and go for it? And how long to overcome that worry of the child? So how long would it take for them, do you think?
Well, the fear of failure is usually stemmed in a few things. One, there's a label that comes onto it, right? And the label is, I'm not good enough, I'm dumb, I'm not capable, I suck. This is where the fear is really stemming from, right? There's an identity crisis that happens when we fail. I was talking to you a little bit about growth mindset earlier. The reason why they don't recommend even complimenting a child when they do something well, like you're so smart, is because they get attached to the identity of being very smart. And as they progress in life, they take less and less challenges with what they notice because they want to hold on to the identity of being smart. So these are some of the things that we have to really push away from. So if our children are really scared of failure right now, that is normal. It is exceptionally normal to be scared of failure, but where we have to get them to anchor into is trying. The constant conversation within the household should be around the attempts, the tries. I would the best way of doing this, I'm going to stress this right now. You're your child's biggest role model. You're going to be their biggest influence. Maybe when they're teenagers, you're not going to be. Eventually, when they probably turn 25, 30 again, that you will be. But because you hold that obligation and that honor, if you can showcase your attempts, if you can showcase the things that you were really uncertain of and and the fears that came up with it, but you're still willingness to persevere, they see this. It doesn't happen overnight. So you asked about the length of time. It can take years to overcome, but it's not something that just switches and you overcome it one day. You'll start to notice micro changes. And maybe in a few months, you notice micro changes. I say this, these micro changes lead to macro results in the child's life. So I wouldn't be pushing it. I'd be okay with it. And every time your child feels a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety around failure, I would have the talks with them when the fear is not there. Let's talk about it. Because as your parent, as your biggest role model, as the person that wants to see you succeed the most, I just want to see you try. I'm going to be congratulating you the second that you try. This is where it stems from.
Amazing. Okay, we have a question from Randy here. Would you be able to touch on how cell phones lead to / impact presence / lack thereof with children?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question that comes up almost every time, is that we live in a different world. We live in a digital world, and we live in a world where perhaps our eyeballs are glued to our cell phones. This is normal, right? There's a new normalcy in life that, unless we're going back to what I think our kids would consider prehistoric, no cell phone age, that we have to understand this is part of the reality. But the question is, how do we mitigate some of the challenges that it has, but also how do we leverage technology to be in favor of us? So a couple of things. One is that I recommend, I didn't mention this today, but I recommend creating a family values guide. A family values guide could be like being present when we need you the most. It is maybe having breakfast together. It's just the simple things that as a family you come together and you all agree on, and these are the rules that you live by. But in that, I would create space for undivided attention. And undivided attention, I would define it. I'll give you an example. When I work with students, I typically make a secret handshake up with them, and we do that at the very beginning of our sessions. And that is our values and our confirmation that cell phones are away, that we're going to give each other full attention, that we're both going to bring our 100%. There's ways that you could do this with your children if you're willing to make it in spurts and times, right? Like when I was growing up, my parents would have said, kids are glued to their TV. Today, we're glued to our cell phones, right? This is going to be consistent evolution, but it's about ensuring that you create a value of spending on time together in which there's no division with it. It's undivided time. And as a parent, you lead with that. Works, Colin, you don't answer it. You have to show the importance of it on your end. The second thing about technology, a lot of times parents say my kids, are playing, let's say, video games or on their cell phones with their friends, and their friends aren't even around. I agree. I'm a kid that was born in the 80s. So, we used to play video games in, one of my friend's basements. That's how things used to be. That's not the case anymore. Our kids connect differently, and that is fine, but we can learn how to connect with them. So what I'd sometimes recommend, if you want to even create time, undivided time with your children, maybe get into their interests. If they're interested in video games, I know this is not for every parent, so I do want to put that disclaimer, but if you're willing to, play with them. Ask them about it. I'm not a person who loves video games. I got into it because of my profession. And the amount of ways I could connect with a kid, because they'll talk about a video game, I'm somewhat familiar with it. It's like, whoa, you know about that? And then and honestly, I probably on my own time put in almost 0 hours into it, but it's showing interest in them. And then saying, if a child's hard to break through to, I will say, why don't we play your video game? And I'm not in their house, I'm playing virtually with them. Parents, you can make time to play with your kids. And it doesn't just have to be video games. It could be basketball. It could be playing instruments. It could be puzzles together. It could be painting together. It could be a bunch of things together. This is why I recommend that technology isn't necessarily the deviant from spending time together. Many times it can actually be a leverage. We just have to understand that we have to get a little bit comfortable with the things that typically we may not be too comfortable with.
Amazing. So we have a few more questions here. So this one, when my kids get upset, the thing they usually do is go to their rooms and shut the door. I don't know what to do and what action is needed to do when this happens. Any recommendations? Should I go into their room? Should I leave them alone and wait for them to come out?
That's a great question. And off the top of my head, and I want to claim that this answer could be, there's probably a multitude to this answer, but what I know is that sometimes space in isolation is important when you're dealing with some emotions and how to regulate them. So perhaps it's not just about them going into the room when they're upset, probably in moments when they're not upset, in moments of, of you're sharing other items and you're perhaps wanting to give life lessons that have nothing to do with any specific event on how to regulate your emotions, I think become the real conversation. Like when you're going to your room, what's going on there, right? Are you punching walls, or are you putting your head in the pillow because you need to scream, or are you texting your friends because you just need a break from mom and dad? And once you can talk to your kids about how to regulate their emotions, it takes time, but there's opportunities that they'll go to the room, but they're going to think about like, mom and dad suck because they did this, but I also could have been a little bit different too. Like, this is what we're trying to get through, right? So it's not necessarily about that. Space, a lot of times people do need space when they're upset, but I also know I've been in situations where kids are hoping that the parent does come as well. So I think it's a play by ear kind of scenario, and perhaps it's a conversation when there isn't tension or heat between you and your children to ask them like, hey, how can I show up best for you? Right? How can I show up best for you in moments that you need me the most? And many times kids, like when people are angry, it's like this switch goes off, especially with kids. And it's like they forgot everything you ever taught them. They didn't forget it. Trust me, it takes time. It takes a long time for them to inherit it. It might take a month, it could take years, but irrespective of it, it's worth the pursuit of having these conversations, because throughout a period of time, the reflection will really start to take place.
Wonderful. So the next question here is, my 3-year-old son is having a lot of temper tantrums at daycare. They are practicing taking breaths and they have a sticker board. He hardly gets any stickers because of his outbreaks. Any recommendations on how I can speak to him, or tips for this daycare?
That's a great question. The temper tantrums, the first thing I will think about is we have to look at what are they rooted in, right? What's the cause for them? Is it because there was sharing and he didn't want to share, or perhaps there was other items with, that's a familiar one that I was speaking to a parent about recently. And I think that's the first kind of identifying thing, perhaps talking to the daycare and having conversation, or what are some of the items that you notice that actually cause for some of the temper tantrums. In those moments is where, once those temper tantrums are down, is where you can start to talk about what are some of those lessons for them. So let's say, for example, it's that they don't like sharing. For whatever reason it may be, is talking to them the importance of sharing, and sharing amongst the family, and sharing amongst friends. And next time to that, you'll be so proud of them that if they actually share with their kids, and that's what you're hoping for. The second thing that I would recommend is talking. They're young when they're 3. It's very common. So I don't want parents to be overly stressed out and saying, my child is 3, 2, 4, and they don't know how to regulate their emotions. That's normal, right? Our emotional regulation skills, they don't develop till we get much older in life, and that's if we put in the work to develop them. So I wouldn't be overly stressed out about it as well, in the sense that thinking that this is, going to be damaging for their entire life. This is where you can start to do the work now and just find out where the root cause is, and then start to address what that root cause is. Some of the things that I have noticed that work, just from a blanketed standpoint, is gratitude, talking about what you're really grateful for every single morning, telling your child why you're so grateful for them, and complimenting, like, let's say the days that there is no temper tantrum, and if your child knows that they're having a lot of temper tantrums and they're being somewhat monitored about this at school, to let them know, like, I'm really proud of you that you didn't have the temper tantrums today. What led you to that? Like, I'm curious, like, how was it playing with your friends? What was it? And then this way they can understand the actions, habits, and behaviors that are leading to the results that you're hoping for with them.
Amazing. Okay, we have a few final questions here. This one says, when a child has 2 homes, split/co-parenting, and they are both very different environments, different levels of support and compassion and parent engagement, are they able to foster the resilience in the child even if the other home environment, is it able to still foster the resilience in the child even if the other home environment, the other parent, has a much different outlook on all of the other aspects, even discipline and parenting ways, etc.? The other parent is not open to the possibility of other methods. Anything especially helpful you could suggest? It's almost 2 sides of coins for each home environment for the child.
Thank you for sharing that question. And that's once again, I want to normalize it, that this is a question I get quite often, is what happens when there's a split within the household, in the parents, and the households have different values and how they approach parenting. And that's very common when you have a split within the household. First and foremost, to your question, is it possible? Yes, it is possible to still build resilience and foster love and compassion within your child. Many times when parents, when people reflect on their parents, even whether their parents are divorced or they've stayed together, there's that one parent that was always there, the one parent that they can call about anything, the one parent that always had a sense of compassion for them, right? That's what every child needs. They need at least one person to showcase like that. And it's usually one parent. It's usually not both parents. So that's why I feel very confident that it is very possible. The second thing, we were just talking about technology. One of the best parts about technology is that you can FaceTime your kids, WhatsApp video them. You can connect with them even when they're not physically in your presence, to remind them of, let's say, their daily affirmations or their gratitude or famous failures. Even when they're not around, you can still impose these things because of the leverage of technology. So I would recommend still keeping pretty good tabs on some of your values, but I wouldn't be overly concerned on it, because most people do reflect that there was that one parent that always was there for them. And if that's you, amazing. That's just amazing. I would keep at it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. A few final questions here from Pam. Any tips on helping a preschooler be resilient through a big change, like starting at a new daycare?
I would say, first and foremost, as parents, we need, there's almost like a level of acceptance and patience that the child may not want to go into a new environment. They might miss mom and dad. They might miss their old friends, and they might be crying for the first month, every hour that they're there, because they feel like, they feel to a certain degree, this is a very foreign environment. The best way of doing this is helping them make friends at a very early stage. And that could be challenging. What I recommend is, if they're transferring, let's say they're going into a new school or a new daycare, and before entering, one of the best benefits about daycares and schools is there are physical location, and everybody lives to some degree a proximity amongst each other. I would host, if you're comfortable with this, but I would host like I call it the back to school party, because this is typically when kids are transferring to new schools or new daycares, and invite over the parents as well as the children within that daycare community or within that school community. So your child sees familiar faces the first day that they enter into that daycare. They've already met them. They've already played with them. They're looking forward to seeing them. That helps take some of the edge off, because it's not that I don't know anybody here. It is, I actually met, little Johnny or little Sally the other day, and we had so much fun, and wow, I'm seeing them again. So I call it like the back to school party, almost like celebrating the fact that there's we typically celebrate graduations and the ending of school, but I consider, why not celebrate when we're entering into it, and bring everybody over for the specific reason of creating a lot more comfort with their children when they do enter into it.
Amazing. A few final questions. I know we're almost out of time here, so hopefully we get to them all. Let's see, from Pam here. Could you share a few examples of positive affirmations for a 3-year-old, a preschooler?
Yeah. And this goes back to, I am capable and I am worthy, and I can. Especially I can and I am capable. I can't stress those ones enough. Even if they're young, they might not even understand what capable means, and you can explain to them that means, your ability to do things, right? So no matter what it is in your life, that you are willing to approach it with the mindset that you can do it. This becomes really important later on in their life, because it becomes that becomes a voice in their head, that when they start to approach challenges, when they start to approach obstacles, the voice that pops in is, I am capable, I can. These are it doesn't matter what age you are. These are become the most, to me at least, become the most important affirmations, because it's something that will carry you and really help build your resilience.
Wonderful. Okay, we have our final question here today. Any suggestions to help with a 5-year-old child that is aggressive with other children?
So this one, very similar to sort of some of the other questions, is that I think we need to find some of the root cause of what causes the aggression. There could be other items that's going on that has nothing to do with the children at school or the children that they're communicating with. It could be, they're stressed about other items in their life, and this is their way of expressing their stress. This is where it becomes really important to create trust and presence with your children and build that level of dialogue, because hopefully they can open up to you about some of the reasons why they feel some level of aggression. I do also recommend, if it's something that's extremely common and you're seeing it maybe grow, there's really good child therapy. And I know therapy tends to have like sometimes a negative connotation. I recommend for you when children are killing it, because it can do wonders. It can do wonders. It helps build self-reflection and gives a space, at least hopefully a space for your child to reflect and understand what their impact is and how they can perhaps change some of their actions to lead to more fruitful and harmonious life. So if your child is young and they're seeing a lot of aggressive tendencies towards other children, it's really trying to identify what's the root cause of these and how you can start to mitigate this, and creating space and presence about this, really creating space and presence about this. I mean, this is pretty common at younger ages where kids start to act out and start to out like essentially be a little bit outlandish. But what I want to stress that if you start to notice it to be fairly extreme, it probably is worth the investment to consider, like, creating that space for your child. And if it's pretty minor, it's probably, you might be able to do that yourself in the house, but that's what I would recommend. I'd recommend creating that space with your presence.
Wonderful. I think we're done with the questions now. I think everyone is so thankful for you taking your time out of your day today, Sunny. That was really inspiring and a lot of good things for children, but also for me as an adult to kind of take back and think about. So I really appreciate your time. Everyone, thank you for your participation. As I said, we will be following up with a recording of the session and some other details that Sunny will share. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.